Welcome back to Inside Assemble AI, the podcast where we explore how artificial intelligence is transforming business strategy and innovation. I'm Sam, and alongside my co host, Mac, we're here to cut through the AI hype and bring you real insights from leaders who are implementing AI strategically in their organizations. Here's a short disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed in this episode podcast are solely those of the host or guest and do not necessarily reflect the policy or position of any organization. The podcast is intended to provide general educational information and entertainment purposes only.
Today's episode is called AI in Action from Enterprise Strategy to Technical Execution, and we are exploring the critical bridge between AI strategy and execution, specifically how organizations are moving from boardroom AI initiatives to technical implementation that actually deliver business value. We are diving into generative AI and cloud architecture, examining how strategic AI decisions translate into technical realities on the ground. Whether you are an executive defining AI strategy, a cloud architect implementing AI solutions, or a technical leader responsible for making AI work at scale, these conversations will show you how strategy becomes execution. Our guest is Aaron Blythe, joining us from Kansas City. Aaron is a seasoned cloud architect and AI/ML expert at Google Cloud, who has earned over 26 cloud certifications, including the latest Google Cloud Certified Generative AI Leader. He merges technical depth with community impact, organizing conferences like Next 5 and Data to AI while nurturing the DevOps KC community for over a decade. Beyond his technical expertise, Aaron is a multi-talented leader who also teaches Taekwondo as a black belt instructor, acts and mentors others in software architecture and DevOps best practices. This unique combination of deep technical knowledge and strategic thinking makes him the perfect person to help us understand how AI strategy translates into technical execution. Aaron, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you all for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks, Aaron. Let's start with the big picture. How are you seeing generative AI shift from experimental use cases to becoming a core part of how businesses operate today? What's driving that transition, in your opinion?
So I've seen a lot of examples over the last 3 years. Like starting in 2023, like 2 years ago, a lot of people were building these custom RAG solutions. And what RAG is a retrieval augmented generator, right? So you have your large language model, but you do a search up front inside of your company's data to say what's relevant to this. And then you send those bits in with the original query or question. So that's the retrieval augmentation part where you do a search and then you send it into the large language model, the generator, right? Last year, what I saw mostly was call center applications, and this would use the RAG pattern quite a bit, but it also started using, this is where we matured a little bit, we started using tools and APIs when it was appropriate. We'd call out into the system and get some information based on what had been discovered through the questioning, but that was usually limited to maybe only connecting out to 3, maybe 5 tools or agents. And if it got too far behind that, it would get a little bit confused on which one to call. So this year, we're starting to see the agentic pattern take form. And this is amazing, right? So with this pattern, we have the large language model, right? The generative AI thing, whether that's or Claude or something like that. And you also have the prompt engineering that we've had since the beginning. And then you have that long and short-term memories. The short-term memory is kind of the conversation you've had so far, but maybe it's something that's saved in a database about you as a user that can be pulled in to show your preferences. And you, of course, have the tools that we had last year, but now we can pull in larger numbers, like dozens of different tools for certain situations. But the thing that really matured this year is a reasoning loop and patterns of thinking, right? And I think that's where companies have started to take these type of things into production. So at Google, we have the thing that I find most interesting, and you can find this on gemini.google.com today, the consumer version, is the deep research agent. I personally have used a deep research agent for a project I did for Next 5, where I wanted to, have you guys ever seen that picture where Jensen Huang is in the center of the stage and then he's flanked by 14 bipedal robots?
Yep.
I wanted to learn about those robots and I wanted to do a presentation on them. So I said, go tell me the list of the 14 robots that are there. And it told me all the names. And I said, well, take those names and tell me the top 8 that are most likely to hit the market. And then I had it create for me like a research paper about that. And it spent about 15 minutes, created a research paper. And then I said, I want a table with those 8 robots across those columns and then rows for each one, telling me the height, the weight, the battery life, the differentiating features, when it will come to market, the price it'll come to market. And it was able to go and do that research that probably would have taken me like 2 weeks in my spare time while I went to like Taekwondo practice. Then I came back and I had a full like table built for me. So things like that and that agent, those are the type of things that I see people using in production today, is that they can actually at this point start to trust that it with that reasoning loop that's going to get over the hump of hallucinating, because it's going to ask for something and then it's going to ask, is that really true? And it'll ground itself in the factuality of what it does. So our deep research agent actually does a Google search and it has those the links to where it found the information that it put in the answer.
That's a fascinating perspective, Aaron. And I totally agree with you that transformation from RAG to AI agent, coupled with this like a chain of reasoning thought process, it seems like a game changer. Now, right now, we literally have like an AI research assistant, like you mentioned, like the Google research. They can do the work for us. I mean, you can just tell them all the stuff and they will just go and find stuff for you and give you an exploratory report or their findings. That's really fascinating, and that's minimized so much of like human manual intervention or like analysis that we spend for weeks and weeks. So thank you for your viewpoints on that. Now, moving on to the next question. As a cloud architect, how has generative AI or LLMs like GPT or Gemini changed the way you design solution? I mean, can you walk us through like a concrete example comparing how we would approach a project with or without AI? Because now I think AI could do a lot of like a research stuff, like you mentioned in a previous statement. So I think kind of a concrete example would be helpful for our listeners to understand the process better.
Absolutely. So the way I think about this is like since the beginning of this large language model revolution, what I've been doing is challenging customers to think outside of the box, right? So unfortunately, what a lot of people do is they try to solve problems that we've already solved with computers and then solve them with a large language model, right? And this is actually fairly silly to me. I saw a headline in my feed recently about this 10-hour competition where a human coder went up against a large language model, and the large language model, I can't remember if it was fully autonomous or if it was like a vibe coding session, but ultimately the human won. And they were saying like, this is the last time this is ever going to happen. And the human described themselves as completely exhausted at the end of the competition. And it made me think of the story of like John Henry. Are you guys familiar with this?
Mhm.
He's the steel driving man from American folklore. He was incredibly strong and he used this hammer to drive spikes into rocks to like have dynamite, right? And then along comes this steam powered drill and they have that competition, very similar to this developer, right? So in many of the stories, John Henry, he wins the competition, but he's so exhausted that he either dies or he's the last person to ever beat the new machinery. And it depends on how, like, you know, whoever the teller of the story is, like how they end it, right? But I don't know. To me, like you can beat the machinery by doing things without all this new technology, but I think it's a lot easier to use the machinery and to use it for what it's good for. So to answer your question, Like there's already calculators. That's a solved problem. And yet I see a lot of people asking a large language model to do simple math problems and then like not either like making fun of the results or whatever. What you should be doing is using some type of tool that the large language model calls out to do the calculator port, right? And then the large language model, what it is really good at is like picking out the pieces of like a story problem. So say you've got this long story problem, parts of that story problem are going to be like the mathematics, right? And that's where you'd have the large language model kind of parse through that. And when needed to do a math problem, it could call out to the calculator problem or the calculator tool. And then it would get that answer. And then that would be deterministic, right? So my line has always been like determinism. If you need something to be deterministic and you need a correct answer, we've written computer programs for decades now, and we do that very well. All of that should be, like at your disposal through the things we already have. What a large language model is going to do is it's going to give this new interface where, like, when I think of like when cell phones came out, like a lot of times we rewrote some of the things that we were doing on the web through the cell phone. Now we have the opportunity to not just rewrite, but actually rethink. And what I tell people to do is like go to your backlog. There's these stories that you've had for years. You've tried to, in different ways, like implement them, and they just didn't work, right? And what you do is you go back and you go, okay, wait, can we apply this new technology? And now maybe we can actually do something that we could never do before. And those are the ones I think that are the most interesting.
Well, I think I totally agree with you, especially like you mentioned about like the like how the AI and all this technology are like making us capable of doing or thinking beyond that we've never done before. And that's kind of like taking us to the fifth industrial revolution, like the convergence of human and artificial intelligence, taking us to a stage that which probably we never imagined before, I guess, like 10, 15 years back. So I'm kind of like curious to know a little bit about the practical barriers around this thing. Like, in your opinion,
Yeah.
Aaron, if you just, tell us a little bit about what barriers do you envision when it comes to scaling this kind of generative AI solution across like an enterprise level, especially like if you could provide some sort of like an example from your past work experience in utilizing AI to build some sort of enterprise AI solution that serve like multiple customers, then that would be great.
Yep. So I do see a lot of similarities right now to the beginning of like the DevOps revolution. I was firmly footed in that many years ago. I started the DevOps meetup and the DevOps days here in Kansas City. And it seems to me like what I'm seeing when I talk to like a lot of my customers is there's separate camps among these customers that I work with. One camp is on the cutting edge and they're really big fans of the technology and they see true benefits to large language models. They see benefits to agentic. And then there's another camp that is so mired in the day to day that they just don't see it yet. Like they haven't had a chance because they're so busy, right? And I think the best thing that you can do as an individual right now is to use agentic interfaces to solve problems that you have and that you encounter. So if you can solve a problem that you're encountering, then you need to show somebody else that methodology, right? And as a company, you have to provide the ability to be able to do this. This, I think, is the biggest barrier that we have right now. Because these tools, most of them have two different types of uses. One is a very consumer-based version, and one is an enterprise-based version. And so you can go right now and use ChatGPT or Gemini in the consumer-based version, or you can actually use it at your work. And if it's not being provided at your work, then I tell you, you don't want to put any of your work's information into the consumer-based version.
Exactly.
The reason is like, at that point, the consumer-based version kind of works like, are you familiar with, Google Maps, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way Google Maps works is we all put our data in and then we all benefit, right? If you're slowed down because of traffic or because of someone getting pulled over or some type of construction or whatever, the speed of your car goes into the system, and then you can let me know that I should reroute somewhere else, right? So there was a story very early on where I don't like to name companies or whatever, but some company put, I think it was a toy company in Europe, put some well-meaning executives put a spreadsheet into ChatGPT, and then everybody could benefit by querying and finding out the profitability of all the SKUs inside of their company. And they got fired, and it was a bad situation, right? So one of the two barriers I see are we have companies that aren't allowing people to do these things inside of their company with protections and security around it, and then people are going to do it anyways, right? So then we have, we hear the bad security stories. So what I think needs to happen is, if you are one of those people that's on the edge of this technology and you're using it and you believe in it, you have to show, with not using your company's data, but you have to show how you can solve problems. And if you're one of the people that holds the keys on whether or not you can bring this type of technology in, you have to let it come in a controlled and secure way, so that people aren't using it in ways that are not controlled and secured. So those are two of the biggest, like, at an enterprise level, is like either people keeping it out or people going and doing things that they shouldn't be doing with the consumer versions.
Totally agree with you, Aaron. Like maintaining the balance between technology adoption and also securing the data and addressing all the risk elements seems like the way to go to address those potential barriers that you mentioned. Thank you for your perspectives. Having said that, I'm going to pass it over to Mac for the next question answer segment.
Thanks, Sam. Great conversation. So I completely agree with Aaron. You just said that one of the examples that you gave previously about the calculator things, right? So definitely, I think it will be a better use case that, the LLM that directly, telling them to solve the mathematical problem. It's better to have, through a calculator API or something call, and to get the problem and to get that answer. And the second thing that you mentioned, I completely resonate with that there is a barrier. I think there is a constant battle, even in I have seen in my company as well, like whether they would allow those AI tools, LLMs, and even they will allow how much data exposure that they are going to give to them, right? I mean, there will be a high chance that there will be a data hallucination, right? And then there is another team, like, they are kind of conservative. They don't want to do that. So there is a constant battle. So anyways, let's get technical for a moment. And you have likely used a range of LLMs like ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, Claude, Grok. Which one has delivered the most accurate results for technical or coding tasks, and why? What are you evaluating when you make those choices?
At this point, I like 3 options for different reasons. I stick mostly to Gemini and Claude, just because when it comes to like suggesting code, I like them for their ease of use and accuracy. I also kind of like, and this isn't necessarily like a large language model, but Cursor and Replit, because you can use like any large language model, you can pick, but they have that IDE built around using different large language models. They've been changing their, I guess, their pricing structure, and it's hard to kind of follow or whatever. But as far as accuracy, I really like Gemini 2.5 and Gemini CLI. It's been described as a beast on Reddit and YouTube and all of these things. But like, that's the one that for the work that I do seems to be the best. Now, that may be because I do a lot of work in BigQuery.
Mhm.
So obviously the Gemini 2.5 is going to be more in sync with working with BigQuery. But I've also been really impressed with Anthropic's Claude CLI. For me, like, the biggest thing is, in a coding situation, it needs to have really good integrations and bindings into VS Code. And I need to be able to do the same type of like back and forth that I've been doing. So that's why I really like those models.
Perfect. Okay. And then building on that, what does a successful generative AI transformation journey look like? Like, from pilot projects to full-scale enterprise adoption. Can you walk us through the key milestones and decision points?
Absolutely. So, from what I've seen, I've worked with a lot of customers, right? You have to start with a problem that you actually need to solve for your business. I think initially what a lot of people were doing was like science projects. Like they were like, what can we even do with this technology, right? And by all means, do all the science projects on the side or whatever. But like if you're talking about enterprise level stuff that you need to take to production, you're going to lose steam and you're also going to lose interest of the company if it's not something that like has business value. So that's where you have to select the right project. Once you're solving a good business problem, and if you're solving something that happens to use large language models or generative AI or agentic patterns, then in my opinion, the rest of it should look almost exactly with slight differences to how you move other things to production inside of your company, right? You still need really good DevOps practices. You need really good testing. One of the things is validations. You should be able to, because what we're starting to see is that like new versions of the model come out every 6 months. And that's not something you can control, right? Like there's just going to be a better model version, right? So, and rather than doing like head to head side science projects of this model A versus this model B, what you really want to do is spend your time building the validations of I asked this question and then this answer is acceptable, right? And then you should be able to do those validations regardless of what model you're bringing to bear, right? At some point, you're going to have to switch models. So the thing that I see people making the mistake of is spending a little bit too much time on the technical of this brand new technology when they actually should be staying on the business side. Like overall, like what this technology brings to us is productivity and the ability to move faster. So you're going to move faster. So what you need to do is like, here's the way my business runs and let the technology move as fast as it's going to move, but really truly define that. Other than the validations, which is really just a different way of testing, I think that the understanding of agentic patterns, right? And that's kind of a moving space. So where I would put my time is making sure that like you're keeping up with like the new patterns and then you're building your business validations. I did see a lot of people waste a lot of time like comparing model A to model B, spending like honestly like 3 or 4 months on that. And by the time they finished, new models came out that were better than both A and B.
Absolutely. Can't agree with you more on that. And another thing that I definitely want to add, like a lot of people that I have seen in my organization, like they don't like to do the validation part because they assume that whenever they were using those different models, that the result will be mostly accurate. And the problem is that I still want to go with the manual process, like the manual in terms of validation. So let's run the LLM any model, and after that, for the validation part, I still want to go the manual. So in
So,
that way, there would be a balance in between.
and remember that there's statistical models underneath, right? So the other thing that's different about validations than testing is I always say run your validations minimum of 10 times, right? Because like if you send the same thing into a large language model 10
Right.
times, you could potentially get 10 different responses. Depending on the question, maybe you get 6 different responses.
Right.
But understand like at least the splay on at least 10, right? So like say you have 10 a set of 10 validations, you should run them each 10 times, and then you should come up with a number out of 100 of how many times you had an acceptable answer, right? Because you could run it just once and end up with like 10 out of 10, but if you run 100, like because of the stochastic nature of this, you might get 81, right? Like, and you need to understand that.
Right. Absolutely. And other questions I actually want to ask you, that you talked about AI agents. So AI agents are gaining serious momentum right now. What are some engineering best practices for deploying those agents across cloud systems, especially where speed, security, scalability matter the most? What have you learned about getting this right?
So for agentic architectures, like as developers, I think that your extra time right now should be put into learning about MCP servers and the A2A protocol. So what these two things are is an MCP server is how you're going to connect to tools and APIs from within the agent. So inside your agent code, you'll have some type of MCP client, and then you'll have an MCP server exposed from some tool that you can use. Maybe that's exposed by the company that runs that tool. Maybe you run a server out in front of it. But understanding like what that paradigm looks like is pretty important. And then also Google created this thing called the A2A protocol. This is an agent to agent protocol. And I think that hundreds of companies have already signed on to this, and it's been given over to the Linux Foundation, right? And that this protocol is like how an agent would talk to another agent, right? So when you start to understand this space on how you build agents, like that makes it so that you can connect to like systems and agents, how they change over time, right? So actually what I think that this ends up becoming is like it smooths out some of the yuckiness there is, that like how versioning poisons APIs over time. When I look at how like an MCP server or A2A works, like the underlying implementation can change a little bit, and APIs can change on these tools, but the MCP server could be the same, right? And it's going to return to you JSON, which has those extra new fields, right? Which, like, if you think back to like, like the SOAP days or whatever, or even REST, like if you start to add more things on there, sometimes you have to change the client code, right? What's cool about this is you can ask a natural language question over to the MCP server, which is awesome. And then it'll send you back a JSON payload, and then you're going to kind of parse that in natural language also, right? So you don't have to every time like your contract changes, you don't necessarily have to change your entire system. So I think that understanding that is going to make you a better developer, and it's also going to, just help you scale to build things faster.
Love that. I really love that. And I never heard of it, the A2A protocol. Definitely, I'm going to try that. So, sometime. Thank you so much. And for my next questions, I'm going to pass it over to Sam.
Cool.
Thanks, Mac. So first of all, Aaron, I definitely agree with you in terms of Anthropic Claude's capability in like coding. I can actually share one example because there's a time I was comparing between O4 mini high model from OpenAI versus Claude, even though like OpenAI claiming that O4 mini high, they're like the best GPT model in terms of coding tasks and stuff. I found Claude is like by far the best, at least in my opinion, because I feel like the Claude gives the coding recommendation in a very structured format, in a modular format. I mean, O4 Mini, I also do the same, but sometimes I feel like they lack certain like an remarks or certain like a recommendation in that way. So definitely agree with you on utilizing Claude for like the coding related stuff. I use Gemini a little bit, but I probably have to use more about the concept of the A2A, like the agent to agent concept that I haven't tried there, but I'll definitely encourage the listeners also try and go and check the Google's A2A agent that Aaron just mentioned. Now, having said that, I'm going to kind of like, ask my next questions in a similar MCP and AI agent ecosystems realm. So for teams building their own AI agent ecosystem, what are the technical advantages of using a cloud native MCP server setup to manage tasks, memory, and tool access? Like, how does that change the architecture decision that you're making? Like, is it something that making your life easier since the MCP server is doing majority of the heavy lifting, or is it like you still have to provide some explicit setup or instruction, or even like add some configuration files to make it work for your enterprise solution? What's your opinion on that?
So this one's an interesting question because this is a really fast moving space. So like a lot of it kind of remains to be seen over time. However, right now, I think like one of the major benefits is standardization. If we look back to like B3C as they were basically creating all of the specs for the internet, part of the reason that we were able to build on the web is all of those standards, right? And so with the standards over time, and if we allow the creator of the service to build the MCP the MCP servers or whatever, then what should happen is like they'll control it in such a way that we should be able to deploy faster, and security will get better, and we'll have breakthroughs and capabilities to traverse the ecosystem faster. But one thing I have seen in this space is there are some really good open source MCP servers, right? Where you would stand up your own MCP server. And I kind of, again, thinking of W3C, I do think that there's a lot of strength in the open source world and the open specification world. So this is where I'm like, there's a lot that remains to be seen. Like, I do like the company that basically provides the tool or service, building something that's very reusable for everybody. But I also love the community building something that's really reusable. So I don't know. For me, I'm watching both spaces very closely to try to figure out like which one I like better for which reason. I kind of explain the reasons why I like them, but like I still haven't made a full determination on what I like better.
I love the way you say that, you still kind of like still yet to be decided. It's kind of a deterministic way we are checking this. And that kind of brings me to the next question, which is around trust. So from your experience, how much can large organization trust LLMs or even, the capabilities of MCP server when designing complex cloud architecture? Do you envision that there will be some risk or something that we need to keep in mind or something that we need to mitigate in terms of utilizing LLMs or MCP or even Google's A2A agent in an enterprise environment?
I think the biggest risks that like as far as like adoption and even like I don't know, not just adoption, but like even business trust is still the hallucinations, right? And this is why I really prefer patterns that keep a human in the loop, kind of like vibe coding. I really like vibe coding because if you're doing vibe coding right, like you should be talking to the agent. The agent's producing code. You execute the code, and then you come back and you talk about either errors or more features. And if you do it in small chunks, right, then you can actually, like you're using the large language model for what it's good for. And you're using an agent for what it's good for, which is to, in some ways, be creative, to go and solve a task for you. But you also, like some of the risks are, you should only be vibe coding in an area away from your production data, right? You should be doing it in a development environment, right? And then the code should go through the same scrutiny of review and testing that's there today for human code, right? I don't think that we're at a place, and I don't know if we will get to a place. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. It remains to be seen, where it's fully autonomous, where like you just describe what you want and have it go do the entire task, right? I think you describe what you want, you check on that, you come back, so it's semi-autonomous. I have seen people have claims that they were able to rebuild an application that took 6 developers 4 months or 4 developers 6 months and do that same thing like in 2 weeks by just vibe coding and going back and forth and creating an app that is very similar to what they had created. Now that's interesting because that actually makes things go faster, but I think that what they were leveraging there was they just had like 2 years worth of work done where they made a lot of the hard decisions, right? So the human has to still be in that loop, right? They're trying to recreate something, but they had many different agile 2-week periods where they're like, well, should we do it this way or should we do it that way? And they happened to know once they were done what the ultimate thing should look like. So yeah, it's interesting. I think that the risk question, I don't know, it's an interesting one because I still think it's hallucinations and I still think it's keeping humans close to it. You do run the risk of someone thinking, I could just use this and it could do all of my work. I think very early on we heard about in the case of like lawyers were allowing ChatGPT to write their entire brief and turning it into a judge. And it was making up case law that wasn't real case law, right? Like, I don't think you hand over the whole thing.
Yep.
And that's, I think, the biggest risk is there is hallucination. There has to be a human in the loop.
No, I think that's the biggest takeaway from this conversation of our last 5 minutes is that you got to keep human in the loop. At the end, especially if someone coming from a data perspective, is that we deal with personal identifiable information, personal health records, and those sensitive data in the enterprise ecosystem. So we cannot just rely on an agent, even if it's the most sophisticated LLM models, behind the scene, but we still need to have someone, a human, to verify that and validate that or provide some feedback. And that's the best way we can reduce hallucination and also gaining that trust from the business customers regarding that, the AI ecosystems. So definitely agree with you on that, Aaron. So now let's just talk a little bit about maybe moving to a little bit of like a positive side of things. What are some of the most exciting or surprising ways companies are using generative AI today to drive business value? Like what's caught you off guard in terms of real world applications? If you can provide some example based on your recent interaction with customers when it comes to utilizing AI for their, many business practices.
Yeah, I think my top two favorite right now are absolutely the deep research agent. I kind of went through that example of like how I did the Jensen Huang robot thing. And I've seen a lot of people create basically like they've been blown away. They're like, man, this is something that takes me weeks to do. And now I can create something and I can sit down and read it for a couple of hours. In the same regard, I don't know if you've seen Notebook LM
Yes.
where it can create a podcast, like two people talking about whatever it is that you've loaded into your notebook. Now that's cool. I really like that. But it also you can create like a quiz to quiz yourself. You can create summaries, you can create all kinds of stuff. And I really like that. But that's kind of in that same space as the deep research. The one agent that we have in Google Cloud's agent space, which came out, is an idea generation agent. And I've used this just as a little test project. I said, can you create a business for me where I use baseball stats to do something interesting? And then it goes away and it thinks about it and it sends agents. So the cool thing about agents is you can have like multiple agents that do separate things. Like you could have like an agent that like an agent grouping that does something like a company would do. Like this is my sales agent, this is my HR agent, this is my lawyer agent or whatever. But or you can have agents do the exact same thing. And because there's statistical models, they're going to come up with different things. So this idea generation agent, like you just have it send out and do like 10 different ideas. And then it does ELO scoring on the ideas that come back. And then you bubble to the top, like, this is the best idea. And I had this do it for like this, idea. I was like, just make me a company that works on baseball stats. Like, what could I do? And I actually like the third idea down from the top. Like, even though like it voted or whatever, because I read through each of the business plans. I mean, I was able to create realistic business plans on here's how you would do things and how would make money. And I was absolutely blown away by this. Like, so I've seen other people use this with their own business data where they're like, give me some idea generation for, projects that we should tackle over the next couple years. Right. And so, I mean, it's like a quick thought experiment, right? At the end of the day, you still want that human in the loop. Like you want to pick the right one, but boy, can you do like a lot of creative thinking incredibly fast.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it just like it kind of like makes us think more about what we're trying to put together. And definitely, I'm a huge fan of Notebook LM. I used it multiple times to kind of like get a summary of research papers or even kind of like get an overview of some YouTube videos and stuff. And it's pretty fascinating the way they. And recently, I tried the mind map feature. That's also a cool feature they have in that Notebook. And I totally agree with you in terms of that analysis stuff. I actually recently I tried the Chat GPT agent for doing a Formula One analysis because I follow Formula One a lot, for last 20, 30 years. And I asked ChatGPT to give me like a thorough exploratory report of Formula One starting from 1975 to the modern era. And it's trying to give me a great analysis report, even what kind of engines they used back in the 70s versus now and what's the differences. It's just fascinating. It took them took ChatGPT agent like 15 minutes to give me the analysis report, and it took me probably like weeks and weeks. Even if I'm an F1 nerd, it will still take me like at least 2 to 3 weeks to come back with that some kind of a report. So definitely, it just they're making things so easier. So many things that we can do right now that we couldn't even imagine. Like a few years back, and it's really fascinating. I totally agree with you. And thanks for sharing those examples. I would definitely
Have,
try that agent that you mentioned and are currently available in the Google world. But I'm a huge fan of Notebook LM. I can definitely tell that to everyone.
have you used the podcast feature? There's a podcast feature where you can interrupt the podcaster and start asking questions. Like it's not just it's an interactive podcast. Like
Mhm.
you're listening to the podcast, and you're like, hold on, wait, what was it you just said? And like the two voices, it's always the same two voices, but they'll stop and they'll start talking to you directly.
I wasn't aware of that. I know that it can transform it has the text to podcast script version. Like it can definitely convert a text script to like two persons talking over a podcast. But I wasn't aware of that interruption feature that we recently
Oh,
added.
it's wild. Yeah.
It's good to know. Thanks, Aaron. I'm going to pass it over to Matt for the final segment of the Q&A section.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Aaron. So we actually already covered a lot of stuff. I mean, in just short time. So the deep research agent and then different LLMs, um, Gemini 2.5, the A2A model, then, like so many stuff, Agentic AI. So one of the things that Aaron, you mentioned about the vibe coding. So you actually said it absolutely correct. Uh, the more that we do the vibe coding, that based on our prompt, I think we will get that output accordingly. So I think, that's definitely like it saves us a lot of time. But at the same time, what I feel and from my experience, that vibe coding also builds the right architecture of the entire software base. Like from an enterprise level, that when we used to do like different designing pattern, different architectural model, singleton model, all this stuff, I sometimes see that these are kind of lacking, and I did a lot of research out of it, and I personally feel like from a very complex coding, it's kind of tough sometimes to do only with the vibe coding. Like if the overall the software that we are building is very complex, it's very huge, robust. So I think maybe it will take more time that we'll get at that level. So that's what I feel. So um, having said, my next question to you, that what trends like multi-model AI, domain-specific models, or AI-driven automation do you think that will define the next 2 to 3 years in enterprise AI? What should cloud architects be preparing for?
That's a really good question. So for companies that embrace this right now, in my humble opinion, all this stuff is about productivity, right? And I don't know if you remember, like I'm a big DevOps person, but they had the DevOps report, and there was one year that it came out and it showed two major things. Like the companies that use DevOps were more profitable, like they were able to show that correlation through the data, and then the individuals in the companies were happier and more satisfied with their work, which was wild. Because like I was trying to tell people that for years. I was like, if we just automate some of this stuff, like then we won't have people just so grumpy all the time. Like I don't know if you remember system engineers, circa 2010, they were a grumpy lot. But I think we're gonna have similar things in this space. The productivity, I think, can go up quite a bit, and I think that companies that can be more productive can be more profitable. And I think that the companies that are going to use this level of productivity are going to be happier. They're going to be more satisfied. I actually so it's interesting you say the next 2 to 3 years. I run a meetup here in Kansas City called Next Five, and we aim to answer the question, what do we need to do right now to be more effective in the next 5 years? And so the topics that we've done so far, we spent 2 months on agentic patterns, and we had people come in and talk about that. We spent 2 months, which might have been a little self-indulgent, on bipedal robots, like, like humanoid robots or humanoid androids in the market, and like how that will change things, and like, can I buy one? I think the cheapest one we found on the market was $20,000, but I just saw something this week that there's a company coming out with one about $5,000, right? And then we plan to spend the next few months on vibe coding and vibe creation. And this I think is where the next couple of years are going to be. Like, we're going to be having that human in the loop. If you use things like VO3, you can create full like commercials, like the video, the audio, the interactions, the setting of a couple of different scenes into something. And so like you vibe things into existence, right? Um, and that's what's interesting is that's multimodal, right? Like that's creating from the text that I use to generate. Maybe I create an image that I really like, because it's cheaper to create the image first. Then I take the image and I put that into from Imagine. I put that into VO3. So then I say, well, animate this image, and I give it more text, right? So now I'm taking an image and text, and I say create a video for me, and then I layer on sound or voice onto that, whether it's a voiceover or whether it's the actual human or animal or whatever speaking inside of that. But still, you have to have a human. Like, I don't think that works very well if you don't do it in increments. Like, when all this started, I thought that what was going to happen was I would be able to like a Friday night would come along, and it would be like the old days when you went to Blockbuster and you went through the shelves and you picked something. I would just say, make a movie for me that has my 5 favorite actors, where a couple of different things happen or whatever, or even take from my existing Netflix feed and create some new combination of things where it's a half hour or hour or whatever. I don't think we're there yet. And I don't know that we'll get there, right? I do think that a human has to be in the loop to kind of say, okay, I do want to take these smaller things and put them together. And I liken that back to, I don't know, I'm a really big fan of the Beastie Boys. What the Beastie Boys did was they scratched up their dad's records. They had some Led Zeppelin records, and they had all kinds of stuff. And people were like, this isn't creation because it's not, Jimmy Page on a guitar or whatever. But to me, like, when I listen to that, they created something brand new from remixing something that was already there. And that's where I feel like a lot of this stuff is like, we'll use multimodal to remix and create something new. That will be a new creation, and I think we'll get a lot out of that. And I think that will happen in the next 2 to 3 years. But going beyond, like, to a full autonomous, I think is around 5 years or more out. I'm a big fan of Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity is Near, Singularity is Near. It's one of my favorite books, and he puts kind of the singularity, it's still out a ways. It's probably maybe around 2030 or something. So I guess that's about 5 years out.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. So humanoid robots, agentic AI, and their vibe coding. So one of the three key points. Also wanted to add that multi-model agent. So I was talking to one of the conference in Philadelphia just a few months back, and then the CIO, she was telling me that they are trying to build the multi-agent chatbot. So one company, they are creating one chatbot, and that chatbot is going to talk to another chatbot from another company. So eventually, nobody needs to talk to company. The multi-agentic model, they are going to talk to each other. So they are going to replace, all the call center representative eventually. So we are actually heading to that era. So love that. And my last questions actually for the intro conversation for today is, so one of the practical question for our listeners who are cloud architects or technical leaders, if someone wanted to start integrating generative AI into their cloud architecture strategy tomorrow, what would be your top 3 recommendations for what to begin?
Ooh, let's see. Into the strategy then? So not just like into like development.
You
So
can
like we're
explain both.
talking.
You can explain
Okay.
both. You can explain the strategy or even like what they want to start.
I think strategy wise, I heard this from another like thought leader in this. If you were to start tomorrow, strategy wise, your CEO needs to start using this technology,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
Because this has to come from the top down.
Top down.
Like it can't just be like, so the first couple of years, like it's been a lot of boardrooms and CEOs saying, hey, nerds, go off and do this thing, right? But if your CEO hasn't even opened Gemini or Chat GPT, they're just telling you to go play around with widgets, right? So I think number one is all the way to the top, you got to start using it. And that also goes for the technical people, right? But it's not just like the technical people go play with it. So that would be absolutely number one for me. And then for the technical people and like my my enterprise architects, cloud architects, people of that nature, it's to understand these agentic patterns. I would get people in that are out in front of you because they're not that far out in front of you. Like the word vibe coding was coined as a phrase in February of this year. But I would bring people from outside to start educating in some way your enterprise architects on vibe coding, agentic patterns, and these new ideas, just so that people aren't starting with a blank page and they can have like some type of idea, right? I think a lot of people, they get a little bit overwhelmed to some degree. They see in their feed like, take 2 weeks off and go learn all of these things step by step or whatever. And they're like, well, there's a lot of things I got to learn, right? I think companies should be finding ways to educate people on these paradigms. And then the third thing I would say is you have to provide an enterprise level platform for this. So the
Right.
way that it's done inside of Google Cloud for the enterprise version is you have a large language model that's frozen, and everything that you're interacting with stays inside of your project. It isn't leaked out to other people, right? But if you don't provide some enterprise level tooling that people can use that's secured, then they're going to use the consumer version. They're going to go out and they're going to figure out a way to do it, and they might leak data. So at the very least, if you can't provide a sandbox today, then you have to start providing education that says don't put our data into these consumer level tools.
Absolutely, Aaron. And I completely resonate with that. So I think majority of the organization they are way ahead right now. I mean, in the AI space, their CEOs, most of the CEOs and executive level, they are very visionary, and like they know how to compete in this market. And one of the example that I can give you the BlackBerry CEO, right? I mean, several years back, for the BlackBerry model for the mobile, like she was not able to cope up with the newest technologies, and that's why like the BlackBerry got bankrupted eventually. So we need to make sure that that we are aligned with all these latest technologies and tools, and also not only that, that how to adopt these technologies from the enterprise level. And what you mentioned also, like for enterprise level architecture, definitely architecture and also infrastructure. So that's also one of the things that CEOs should definitely consider. So having said, for the next question, I think we can wrap it up. And now it's back to you, Sam.
Thanks, Mac. I totally agree with you both because at the end, it's really important to make sure that the AI literacy are kind of like, consistent across the organization. I agree with you both. Like, it has to be come from the top. It should be a top-down approach where CEO or the leaders kind of like laying the foundation on how each and every employee at the organizational level should, educate themselves about AI use cases. What are the pitfalls, and how they can, make sure that they can utilize AI to steer the innovation, but not at the risk of data or technology risk in the organizational level. So this is AI literacy is must at this in this current era, especially to keep up with the technology innovation going on in the Gen AI world. So Aaron, this has been incredibly insightful. Thank you for your technical wisdom and sharing with us about your perspective about Gen AI and how things are going to shape out in next 5 years. I would say that maybe we are not far away from AGI, But again, that's a kind of a debatable question at this moment, and I guess Sam Altman and those other CEOs in the tech world are kind of like have different opinions on that, but we'll see how things pan out. We don't have a crystal ball, but hopefully we will see a scenario where we can see some sort of like foundation for AGI in 5 or 6 years. Before we wrap up, what's one piece of advice you would like to give to a cloud architect who is feeling overwhelmed by all the AI option and possibilities, but don't know like where to start? Because at the end of the day, as a cloud architect, I guess you feel like the urgency or importance of learning AI and how to utilize all these AI tools. So, what opinion you or suggestion you would like to give to a newbie or trying to kind of like get into a cloud architect field, and how they can keep up with this AI innovation?
The biggest advice I give to anybody, and I even did this before I worked at Google, is invest in yourself. That 20% time. Not every company has this or whatever. Some people are too busy or whatever. But take time to make time, or make time to take time, however you want to say it, right? You need to find a way to have 4 to 8 hours a week where you're investing in yourself. And what I would invest in yourself at this point is understanding some of these tools. That can be as simple as um, going and getting a class off of like one of the umpteen million platforms. I personally like Udemy because it's like I get codes. It's $11.99 or $15.99 for a class. But I think it was said at the opening, I have 26 um, cloud certifications. Like that's what I invest in myself, is going and learning things. And I watch a lot of Udemy videos. I watch them on double speed. I find time when I'm either like on the treadmill or actually sometimes, because you don't have to watch very closely. Don't tell the cops this or whatever. But sometimes I'll just set my device or phone on the dash of the car, right? So I'm not actually watching it, but I hear the words that are being used about the cloud. I hear the words that are being used about AI, and just being around smart people that have spent the time to describe their smartness about this, like it just elevates you very quickly. My big thing is listening to and watching videos. Maybe your thing is hands-on. There's plenty of platforms for that, but carve out some hours in the week where you're doing something that you don't have to do for your job, but you will need to do sometime in the next 5 years.
Love that.
Thanks, Aaron. Love that. Yeah. So for our listener, continuous self-learning is the way to stay relevant in today's fast-paced AI world. So, Aaron, for our listener who want to follow your work or learn more about cloud architecture or even any revolutionary Google AI products, where can they find you?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn. I might be tagged in whatever's here, but it's Aaron Blythe. Just search for me and you should be able to find me. I try to share when I'm speaking at different things on there. If there's ever any way you think that I can help you, don't hesitate to reach out. Like I've got very varied interests, so you'll learn those as we connect. And I look forward to connecting with people.
Thanks, Aaron. And whoever in the Kansas City area, please be on a lookout for Aaron's next AI-related meetup. Having said that, I'm going to pass over to Mac for the closing remarks.
Thanks, Sam. That's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you for sharing your expertise and giving us such a clear picture of how generative AI is transforming cloud architecture from the ground up. For our listeners, we have got links to all the tools and resources Aaron mentioned in our show notes at inside.assembled.ai. And if you are implementing AI in your cloud architecture practice, we'd love to hear your stories, both the success and also the challenges. If you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe and share it with someone who might benefit from thinking about AI more strategically in cloud architecture. We'll be back with more episodes featuring AI leaders, innovators, and strategic thinkers. Until next time, this has been Inside Assemble AI. Keep innovating, but keep it strategic. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.